right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. This is Kuali Days, day 4, I believe, our last day. And this session is we're going to look at routing and crumbs configurations. My name is Kat. I think I know pretty much everyone on the call, but here I am. I'm the Director of Customer Success at Kuali. And really what that means is I help institutions implement Kuali once they decided to go with us. And then I also oversee our portfolio of implementations. So during today's session, I do want to just go over quickly through some of the housekeeping items that I have on the slide here. I do want to let you know that I do have quite a bit of, I have a few slides that I'll be going through today, but I'll be jumping between slides and a live demo so that I can, go over a concept and then show you how that concept or that thing would be configured. But the slides will be uploaded to the platform with the session, so you will have access to download them if you wanted to. Same thing with the recording. So the session is being recorded. And then once the recordings are sort of processed, they will be uploaded with the session as well, so you can rewatch this. Also, I would ask you to go and rate the session. So after the session, in the session description area, there is a rate now button or link. Feel free to go there and rate the session. And then if you have any questions for me as I'm going along, feel free to ask, unmute yourself and ask the question. Or if you prefer, feel free to put them in a chat. That also works. I have Beth and Omar on the line from Kuali. So they'll be monitoring the chat. So if there's something they can answer, they'll go ahead and answer. Otherwise, they'll just interrupt or just jump in and ask the question if you've posted it in the chat. And then just a quick note that the slides and the recordings, as well as the app, the Socio app, which is where the schedule is, that's going to be available through the end of October. So you'll have anywhere between now and end of October to access the slides and the video if you wanted to watch this again. So for today's session, for those of you familiar with our sponsor programs configurations, you guys know that there is just a lot. There is a lot, and sometimes it's more complex than other times. So as you suspect, even when we're looking at crumbs configurations, it's a lot more content than what we can cover in an hour. So today I want to start with sort of just the basics. So I apologize for those of you who are already experts in this. A lot of this may be sort of info that's been, it's repetitive, but I do want to start with the basics in case we have some of the newer folks on the line who haven't really dove into configurations. And then I want to actually go through the 3 types of examples that crumbs support. And that's routing, validations, and questionnaires. So I do have specific examples that I'll go in and demo how to configure. And then if we do have time, I do want to show you how we would go about adding a new property term to crumbs in those cases where you do need to add one and it hasn't already been there by default or out of the box. If we don't have time, my slides do include the instructions. So that is something hopefully you'll be able to follow outside of the session if we don't have time to cover that. So the first thing I want to start with is what's crumbs? And I'm sure you've heard folks, call it crumbs, but you might be just like, what does it stand for? So crumbs stands for Quality Rules Management System. So really, it's a business rules engine that can be used to set up a series of rules in Kuali Research to trigger things or have the system behave in a particular manner. And the crumbs engine currently is supported in the following modules. So it's not available in all of the sponsor programs modules. And here's the list. So award, a budget, institutional proposal, proposal development, and subawards. As you can see, what's missing from the list here is negotiations, as well as the new module export control. So we don't have support for those yet in the crumbs business rules engine. Negotiations, negotiation is really a live document. It never gets finalized. It's always saved and initiated and saved. And then I believe export control may be something that will eventually be added onto the list. So what can crumbs do? So based on my agenda, you quickly saw, there are 3 examples that I'm going to go over, and those examples correlate to what the engine can actually do. So crumbs allows us to build custom validations. So we have a number of validations that are hard-coded in the system, and that comes standard out of the box in the base code. But then via this crumbs business engine, you are capable and you have the ability to set up your own custom validations. And for example, those validations could be errors, or they can be warning messages. Errors ensure that a certain data point that you're validating is completed before a record is finalized, or in the cases of proposal development, it's submitted for review. A warning message, it just displays a message to the user indicating that there may be a problem, but it's not going to actually prevent a user from finalizing and routing a document. So again, each institution is able to build their own validations based on the criteria that are available in the system to support some of these error and warning checkings that they want. The other piece of functionality that the crumbs engine supports is routing. And routing, it's really a multi-step process to set it up. So the crumbs piece supports sort of the last step of triggering the routing. So in today's session, I will go over through an example of how you would set up sort of a routing piece on the proposal development side, though it's also available in other modules also. But the crumbs engine allows you to, again, using the rules and functions that we have available, trigger a particular routing map on a document. So again, we'll go over that as an example, just so you can sort of see how that's put into practice. And then the other piece of functionality that crumbs is able to support is questions and questionnaires triggering. And this is on proposal development, because proposal development is the only module that currently supports questions and questionnaires. But you can build crumbs rules, agenda rules that then are used to trigger when a question or a questionnaire shows up in a proposal development. So again, I'll do a quick example of that just so you get to see how that's put into practice. Go to the next slide. So I do want to provide some sort of tips when it comes to setting up the agendas. For those of you, again, who are familiar with that process, you may already know that, before you go into setting up an agenda, you probably want to get some prerequisite pre-work done, because once you get into setting up the agenda, the system is going to ask you for certain attributes, which are located in different maintenance tables. So you'll have to look things up. So I would encourage you to sort of do this pre-work first, and then go in and sort of start setting up the appropriate crumbs agenda that you are looking to set up. So the very first thing I would encourage you to do is decide or write down the business logic. So the system, the crumbs engine, uses a logic that is heavily sort of dependent based on programming sort of languages and programming logic. So if you're not familiar with and or sort of statements, I would encourage you to just write it out. Sort of, what are you trying to accomplish? What is the business logic for what you're trying to build? And again, I have some examples that we'll go through of how sort of I go about when it comes to building a crumbs agenda. And then I would encourage you to gather the prerequisite information. And again, you'll see this put into practice a bit more as we're looking at the examples, and you'll see exactly what I mean. Oftentimes when you're building an agenda, you have to add rules, and these rules are looking at pieces or attributes in your proposal or award, depending on where the agenda is applied to. And those pieces will often reference code values, and those code values are located in maintenance tables. So really what sort of I'm trying to highlight here is I would encourage you to identify what pieces you're going to be using in your agenda, and then gathering that information, those code values, so that when you go and build the agenda, you already have those code values or pieces already identified. And then the other thing you want to identify is the units, the departments that these agendas are going to be applicable to. The crumbs agendas are driven based on a unit field. So when you create a new agenda, one of the first things the system is asking you to identify is what unit this is applicable to. And you can set it at the top level of your unit hierarchy, or you can identify a different unit that this agenda applies to, so it's triggered appropriately. So that's one of the other pieces I would encourage you to just identify at the time as the very initial step in trying to build a KRMS agenda. And again, I'm going to be putting these tips into practice with my examples, so you'll sort of see how I tend to lay my process out before actually going into the system and building things. I do have a number of slides here highlighting the KRMS agenda sections, as well as the different fields that you are going to see in the KRMS agendas. I'm not going to go into detail or sort of go over details of these slides, because this is something that, you know, you can probably just review outside of the training session. But I'll just highlight some of the key components of a KRMS agenda. So there are 3 sections and pages within the KRMS agenda. The very first one is the agenda editor, which is this top portion, as well as the rules section right here. And the agenda editor is where you'll have the basic agenda information, such as what's the name of the agenda, what is the type of the agenda, and then the rules section is going to outline all of the different rules that are applicable to that agenda. You can have an agenda where there is only one rule listed in that agenda, or you can have an agenda where you have added multiple rules in it, and those rules could also be compound rules where you're doing true and false statements. So again, the agenda itself can have logic built into it, or you can just have a simple agenda with just one rule, and then the rule is evaluating the logic. So again, a lot of flexibility there. And a lot of complexity that can be introduced. So here's just an example of an agenda that has multiple rules that are using the when false, when true statements. We then have the rules editor that's going to include the rules information. And the rules editor is going to store the propositions. So each rule, so this is a rule right here. Each rule will then have propositions, which can be, again, one or more propositions could be included in a rule. So again, you'll see that put into practice a little bit more as I'm working through my examples. And then the last piece of the agenda is agenda rule, I would say, is the action that that rule is going to execute. So is it going to route to somewhere, or is it going to validate something, or is it going to notify someone? So those are the 3 types of actions that an agenda is going to be able to support. So it's going to be able to notify someone, route to somewhere for approval, or validate that a piece of data is there. And then my slides go into actually going through each one of the fields that are identified in the agenda. So again, I'm not going to go one by one through these definitions. I'll just highlight some of the key pieces that I think are important. So when you build a new agenda, the first piece of information that the system is asking you to identify is the namespace. So really, what module is this agenda going to apply to? And as I said in my previous slides, there are currently agendas are supported in proposal development, budget, institutional proposals, awards, and subawards. And I don't think those are the only modules. So that's this drop down right here. So that's what the system is going to first ask you to identify. What module is this applicable to? The next thing is the name. So the system is going to ask you to assign a name to your agenda. And we sort of have best practice recommendation around the name. So if you are, intending to create many agendas in your particular environment, we do encourage you to come up with a standard naming convention, so that folks, if you have some other new administrators coming in the role, they can sort of quickly identify what these agendas are doing and sort of the standard naming convention that you have implemented. The other thing I want to highlight, another key piece of information here, is the type of agenda you're building. So there are 3 types that you'll be able to select on the proposal development side. On the award, IP, subaward side, there's just a unit agenda type. So you're not going to see questionnaire and cost share. But regardless of which type you select, the system is still going to ask you to identify what unit this agenda is applicable to. So again, if you want to enable the agenda to be applicable to all units, you'd set that top level of your unit hierarchy here. If it's only applicable to certain units, you'll be able to identify a different unit number here. Another option is to set this to be the top level of the hierarchy in the unit number here, but then in your propositions, in your rules, have the system evaluate other units and trigger a particular rule or a particular validation just to certain units identified in that proposition. So again, there is that logic capability available also. As I mentioned on the proposal side, so I do have a screenshot here of a proposal development agenda. The other two options that you'll also see in the type of the agenda is the questionnaire option, which is used if you're building an agenda specific to a questionnaire, meaning you want to trigger a questionnaire based on a certain criteria met in the proposal. So that's the cases you would use this type. And then the other one is a cost share agenda, which I've linked this to our article on how to configure that in case you wanted to give that a try. And that just allows you to configure a cost share routing as described in that linked document. And really what this allows you to do is it will set up cost share routing as a separate branch, which is independent of your proposal routing. So maybe you want to route your proposal in a sequential or parallel order to all of the approvers that need to approve the proposal, but you don't want to slow down that proposal because of a cost share approval. So with this cost share agenda logic, you have the capability to sort of have two separate branches of routing happening on the proposal. One is that standard proposal approval to get the proposal out the door. And then you have the separate cost share branching logic that sort of is independent of that other approval logic. So that agenda is also available. Oops. And I clicked on the link, so that's why the system opened that up. So let me go ahead and go to the next slide. So then once you set up your agenda, the basic attributes of the agenda, the next step in the process is for you to start adding rules. And once you click on the add rule button, the rule editor window shows up, and that's where you are going to be able to start completing that information. And then similar to what I've included in the prior slide, I just have some high-level definitions here included for the different fields that you are going to see in the rule editor. So before you start adding the rule sort of attributes components, the system is going to ask you to identify what is the type of a rule. And there's only one option there, so it's a validation rule. But once you select that validation rule, the system is going to ask you to, how do you want to execute this? Should it execute when your criteria are true, or should it execute when your criteria are false? So you'll be able to indicate that. You then have to assign a rule name, which has to be a unique name. So again, sort of as best practice for the name and for the description, we encourage you to provide information so that when someone looking back at this rule is able to quickly determine what this rule is doing without having to dig through the propositions. So again, just some quick guidance on that. And then once you set up your basic rule information, such as the name, the type of a rule, and how it should execute, the system is then, or then you'll be able to start adding the propositions, which is really the logic for this rule. So when you click on the add button to add a proposition, the system is going to display the following fields. So description, category, term, comparison value, and then depending on sort of the term selected, there might be some additional info that shows up at the bottom here. So again, for the description, it does have to be a unique description, but again, just put some logic around here. What is this particular proposition evaluating? So again, in my particular example, what I'm adding here is, as you can see on the screenshot, I'm saying that the proposal type is a preliminary proposal or a letter of intent. And I like to put the code values in parentheses so that if I ever have to refer back to this proposition, I know what code values are, because then the system asks me to identify those code values below here. So I just want to have that information readily available without having to go back and figure out what code value did I use, what is it. So again, some of best practices around sort of naming conventions that I like to implement and encourage others to use as well. Once you assign a description, the system is going to identify what category of term are you using. This is not a required field. You can go directly to the term list and you'll just see everything that's available, but the category is going to allow you to set up some filtering here to see what shows up in the term list. And we have the following categories available. We have properties, we have functions, we have questionnaires, and we have custom data. So as you suspect, questionnaires and custom data are pretty self-explanatory. What that means is you can build propositions using questionnaires. So if you have a question in a questionnaire, you can use that as a piece of data to validate something or route to something based on an answer to a particular question in a questionnaire. Same thing with custom data. You can use custom data and build routing and validation rules. But I think there's a little bit of sort of, not confusion, but a little bit more understanding around what are properties and what are functions. So functions is something that one of our engineers on the Kuali team would build. They have a little bit more complexity into it, and they require some coding behind the scenes in order for us to use that function to evaluate a criteria. So a function is not something that is directly stored in a database. So again, that's why there is that logic that needs to be built. So the most common sort of, or the most relatable example of a function is the lead unit below function that is available in the system. There is nowhere in a database where the lead unit sort of below, which means, you know, a department is rolling up to something in the hierarchy. There's nowhere in a database where that is sort of reflected or that business logic is evaluated. So we need an engineer to build that logic first as a function, and then we can use that function in a rule. And then we have properties, which properties are pretty simple. The system just evaluates what the value is in a database for a property. So the most common example of that is, you know, for example, a status code for an award or for a proposal. You know, that's a simple value. It's stored directly in a database, so that most often will be represented as a property. And one thing with properties is that there are a handful of properties that already exist in a system and come standard out of the box. But you have the ability to actually add properties if you see that a property doesn't exist. And that's sort of what the last piece of my agenda was, is to be able to set up your own properties if there is something that's missing. So one thing on properties is you do have the capability to add your own if you find that that one doesn't already exist out of the box. And then we have some additional fields here. And again, I will go through each one of these fields as I'm setting my example. So again, hopefully it'll be more relatable as I'm actually doing a live example, so you can put this more into practice. And then the last piece of the agenda rule is the action. So what is the action that the system is going to execute when the rule that I've identified is true or false, depending on how I've set it up? And again, there are three types of actions that could be executed. The first action is a validation action. So that's where we're building validation. So the user will get an error or a warning message, depending on how I've set my validation. And then the other two actions are routing and notifying. So those have to do with the people flow concept and setting up routing. So route to people flow, that means that a proof action is going to be requested based on which people flow we're triggering based on the rule. And then notifying is just going to create an FYI action to the appropriate users, again, as identified in the people flow that's associated with that particular action or that particular rule. So again, we'll do some examples here. So again, you'll get to see this a little bit more, and hopefully it's a bit more relatable. So before I go into an actual example, I do want to just pause here and see if there are any questions so far. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start with examples. So the very first example that I want to go through is a people flow and a routing example, and sort of go through the steps of how you would go about configuring that. So here is where I'm putting my tips into practice. You know, as I said, as sort of the first step, I always like to identify and document, what am I trying to accomplish? What's my business need? So here's an example I'm going to work with. So one of the things is if a proposal, so I'm working in the proposal development module, if a proposal includes intellectual property considerations, it must route to the patent office for approval. So again, very high level business needs statement. So now, sort of as someone responsible for having to build this logic into the system, I need to be sort of more detailed in identifying, first of all, how am I tracking intellectual property on my proposal? Is it a question? Is it a custom data? What are the attributes that I'm using to get that information? So I know in my example that I'm using today in my environment, intellectual property considerations are actually 3 custom data fields. And I've identified what those custom attributes are. So I have 3 questions that are being asked. So basically what I'm saying is if any one of these questions is as yes, then I want to route to the patent office for approval. And then I also want to identify when should it route to the patent office for approval. And again, this is all going to depend on your needs. You probably already have routing set up in your environment, and it could be, personnel, chairs, deans, and the sponsor programs office. It could be less or more complex depending on your current structure. So it's important to also identify at what point does it go to the patent office. And in my case, it's going to go to them at the same time as all of my personnel approval stuff. So again, this is all highly dependent on the current configuration in the environment. So I have my business logic built out here. So I know what custom data fields I'm looking at, and I know when I want to route to the patent office. So then there are some prerequisite information in addition to this logic that I'm going to need. And one of it is I need to set up my people flow. Before I can create the agenda for this, before I can build the logic to route to someone for this, the first step I need to do is I need to create this people flow. And people flow, you also hear folks refer to it as an approval map. And it's really just sort of identifying who are the folks that need to approve and at what step in your approval routing chain. And I will go ahead and create that people flow real quick so you get to see what it looks like. But I know that I want to route it to a group. So I'm going to set up a group who's going to represent my patent office, and it's already set up in my environment. And I know that the priority of that people flow group is going to be 200. So again, I've already looked into the system to gather that information before I go and start building this. And then the other information that I know I need is I need to know, based sort of on the experience I've had with building Chrome's rules, is I need to know what the custom attributes IDs are. So these custom attributes that I have highlighted here, I apologize, each one of these has an ID associated with it. So I need to figure out what those IDs are. And I just documented them here quickly so that I can quickly enter those IDs as I'm working with building this rule. And then this is going to be applicable to all departments. So that's why I've listed all units as the applicable units here. So once I have this information documented, I'm going to go in and start building this now. And the first thing I need to do is build the people flow that is going to be used for this particular approval routing process. We log in to our demo environment. So as I've mentioned, the first thing I want to do is build that people flow, which is that approval map, where I'm identifying who is it that needs to approve in this particular case. All of the things that I'll be working with today are going to be located under the all links. And I'm just going to type people flow, and here it is. This is also the place for you to go and check all your current approval people flows. If you need to ever verify what approval routing steps you're using, you can always click at any one of the approval people flows you have created to just refresh your memory to see sort of what does your stop hierarchy look like. So I'm going to go ahead and create new. And again, this is me creating that approval map first. So the system is going to ask me to identify the needed fields here. So I'm just going to provide a description. So I'm just going to say Chrome's training. The namespace it's going to be the module for the most part that you're building this people flow for. So in my case, it's proposal development. If you're building a people flow to work with approval routing on award, you would select the award namespace. So again, you want to select the appropriate namespace here. You then have to enter the name. And again, as sort of a best practice, I would encourage you to come up with standard naming sort of convention when you're setting up your people flows. So I'm just going to say patent office proposal approval. And then there are there's 4 types here of people flow. This SAP type is not something that you would use. We just haven't removed that from the code. But we have a basic people flow, advanced people flow, and unit-specific people flow. The unit-specific people flow is going to ask you to identify the unit qualifier for this people flow. So this would be used if I'm using like units, unit admins, maybe if I'm using groups, I have more capability with adding a unit qualifier for a people flow. In this case, since this is applicable to all units, I'm going to make this as an advanced people flow without having to specify that unit qualifier. And then I get to identify the people flow member. So who is going to be part of this approval map? So the stop is the priority that I've mentioned in my slide. So if I flip back here, this is the stop. So I know that I've already identified that this needs to be at the stop 200. So I'm going to modify the stop to be 200. The member type. So here is where you get to identify, are the members actual people? So in this case, it would be the principal, and then you'll search for the person that is the person that needs to approve. Or is it a group, or is it a role? So you can set up people flows to work with groups, roles, and actual people. So again, you probably want to decide that as part of your people flow setup. What is the appropriate method for you to manage this? We often encourage folks to use groups, because the maintenance of approvers, changing approvers, it's pretty straightforward. Similar with roles, behave very similarly to groups, where maintaining them, you don't actually have to update the people flow. You go into the role and you change the role, or you go into the group and you change the members of a group, and then that trickles automatically to the associated approval maps and anything else that those groups or members or roles might be part of. So in my case, I am going to use a group. And I'm going to find the group that I've already set up. I don't remember the name, but I know it has to do something with patent information, I think. So I'm just going to, intellectual property review group. I've set that up already. And then I'm going to go ahead and click the add button. So now I've set up my people flow. I can add additional stops. So if a single people flow map has multiple approval stops, that could be all configured in a single map, or you can set up a separate people flow if needed. You could also indicate if there are delegates. So in the cases of delegates, I often also explain that as alternate approvers. So if there are any alternate approvers, you can add them as member delegates below here. I'm going to go ahead and submit this. So now I've set up my people flow. So I'm sort of halfway done through the process. This people flow is not triggered in anywhere yet, because the system doesn't know yet when to trigger this appropriate people flow map. So this is where the crumbs agenda is going to come into play. The crumbs agenda is what's going to now tell the system when this people flow needs to be triggered in a proposal development record. So I'm going to go back to all links, and I'm going to now search for agenda. Sign me out. So I'm going to go ahead and go back in here and go back to all links. So again, I already have a number of agendas in here, and you can update an existing one. In this case, I'm creating a completely new agenda. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this create new button that's available here. And I'm going to start entering the attributes that we reviewed when we were going through the definitions sections of our slide. So this is related to proposal development. So I am going to select proposal development as the namespace. The name, as I mentioned, you want to come up with a naming convention. So since this is related to workflow or approval process, I'm going to call this workflow. And then I'm going to say patent office proposal approval. I'm going to select the context. So there's only one context associated with each namespace. So that's going to be the PD context. So that's the only option the system is going to allow me to select here. And then I'm going to select the type of the agenda I'm building. So in this case, this is going to be a unit agenda. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And then associated with the department. Since this applies to all of the departments in my hierarchy, I'm going to put the top level of the hierarchy here. You could also utilize the lookup icon to find the unit number if you don't know what that is off the top of your head. So I'm going to do the 5 zeros and then a 1. So that's my top level of the hierarchy here. Again, you might have a different top level of the hierarchy. Maybe it might be a different number. So again, you just want to make sure that you select the appropriate selection here. And now I'm going to go ahead and add the rules. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this add rules. And again, we went through some of the definitions here. I'm going to go ahead and select the name. So this is a routing rule. So I don't have to select the type here. The type should only be selected if you're building a validation rule. So I'm going to leave the type blank, but I am going to put the name of this rule that I'm building. So this rule is going to look at custom data. So I'm just going to say custom information custom data is yes. I can provide more content around this rule that I'm building. So I can add an additional description here if you wanted to. I'm going to leave it blank for the purposes of this demo. And now I'm going to start adding the individual propositions. So based on this, I know that I'm working with 3 custom data fields. So it is going to be a compound proposition where if this is yes, or this is yes, or this is yes, then trigger to route to this particular office or a person based on how I've set that up. So the very first thing, my very first proposition is going to look at the first custom data field that I've identified. So I'm going to say custom data ID. And I think one of my first IDs is 109 equals yes. And again, this description could be whatever you wanted it to be, as long as it makes sense to you. And then from the category, I am going to select custom data because I am using custom data to do this. So I'm going to click custom data attribute. From the term, if I've used custom data attributes in any of my prior rules, I will see those terms identified here. But for this now, I'm going to check the new rule that's available here. So I'm going to check if custom data matches the given value. In this particular case, I'm going to use the comparison. So you have a list of the different comparisons that we can use here. And my slides do define these comparisons. So again, I'm not going to go into detail of that right now, but for the purposes of my example, I want to trigger this if custom data equals yes, because I know that my custom data is using the yes, no radio button. So I do have to enter either yes or no. If your custom data is a text field, or if it's a date field, then you'll have to enter the appropriate value that custom data is able to accept. But my custom data are only using yes, no radio button. So I want this rule to trigger when my custom attribute equals yes, but then I have to identify what is the custom attribute that I'm checking. So in this case, it's custom attribute 109, which is this very first question. Does your proposal include proprietary information? That's custom attribute 109. Oops. So now I have ways to go because I have 2 other custom data that are considered, to track information, whether or not the proposal includes that patent or proprietary information. So I still need to build logic to evaluate the other custom data fields. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the add button that's available here. And the system is going to now add a second proposition. The operator defaults to and. In my case, I don't want this to be and, I want this to be or, because it's either this or that or this other thing. So I'm going to select or as my operator, and then I'm going to repeat this for the other custom attribute ID, which was, I believe, 110. And then I'm going to do the same thing, custom data attribute, select that as the term equals yes, and then custom attribute ID is 110. And then I'm going to do this one more time. And again, the system now is going to retain that or operator. And I think this is 11, 111. And then this is custom attribute. So pretty straightforward because they're all equal yes, and I'm just adding what the custom attributes are. So once I've built my logic in my propositions, I just want to validate it. So if this is yes, or this is yes, or this is yes, then I have to tell the system what action does it need to take. So here's where I'm going to select the 3 types of actions that we have available. It's a validation action, notifying people flow, or routing to people flow. So in my case, I want an approve action. So I'm going to select route to people flow. And here's where I get to identify now that people flow that I've just built. So here's where I would search for the people flow. And I forget what I called it. So I'm just going to do a blanket search. And here you go, patent office proposal approval. I'm going to select that people flow. The people flow name is going to pre-populate with your people flow name that you've assigned it, but you still have to enter a name here. So I often just copy and paste the people flow name here. I'm going to click the add rule. So now my rule has been added. I'm going to go ahead and submit to finalize my agenda. And now I'm going to quickly check to see if what I've built makes sense. I would encourage you as you're building, especially if you're building multiple agenda, multiple rules, after you build an agenda, go ahead and validate that it works. You know, sometimes if you build multiple agendas at once and then you try to go validate them later, you might run into issues where something doesn't work. You get a stack trace error, for example, and it's hard to troubleshoot at that point which agenda is actually causing the issue. So again, I would encourage you, you build one, go and validate it quickly to make sure that it's working and that it's not causing any sort of negative impacts on your proposals. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly validate my agenda that I've built. So this is a proposal. As I said in my examples, I'm looking at the intellectual property information. I'm going to mark these as no for now. So because these are all no's, I should not see my workflow route stop being triggered. So if I go to summary and submit, and if you click on the view route log, I'm not seeing my intellectual property review anywhere here. So this is my standard route log. I don't see anything here. But if I go to my supplemental info area, which is what I'm tracking, and if I say yes to any one of these questions or all of these questions, I should now see that intellectual property review, that patent office review, be at the same route stop as all of my personnel stop. So if I built everything correctly, I now see intellectual property review. I see all of my personal review, and I can click the show button just to quickly verify that they have the same priority. So what this is going to mean is when my proposal is submitted into review, it's going to go to the personnel and it's going to go to the patent office all at the same time. Okay. All right, so I'm watching the clock and I want to make sure I cover validations and questionnaires as well. So I'm going to quickly shift focus and we'll take a look at an example of a validation. How would you go about building a validation in a system using the KRMS engine? So similar to what I did before, I kind of highlighted or outlined my business need or my business logic first. So what I want to do here is I'm going to build an award validation. And basically what the need is I want to ensure that if there are human subjects, that the human subject's IRB is approved before an award is set as active. So again, this could depend all on how you're tracking human subjects compliance special reviews on an award. So I'm assuming that the way that it's being tracked on my end is it's a compliance entry, it's a special review entry. And basically what I'm going to see if an award status is active and human subjects approval status is either pending or not yet applied, I want the system to give an error message to the user when they try to submit that award that the human subject's compliance must be in approved status in order for the award to be considered active or set to a status of active. So again, I've done similar sort of background work first, again, just sort of based on the experience. I know that I need to get all of the different status codes and codes values I'm going to use award status code in my validation. I'm going to use the special review type code in my validation, and a special review approval statuses codes in my validation. So those are the pieces that I've gathered before going in and building this validation message. And then again, it's going to be applicable to all units. It doesn't matter what unit the award belongs to. This is applicable to my entire institution. And I always want to validate when those criteria are met. So I'm going to go ahead and build this validation. And let me just make sure I have my slide pulled up on my other screen just so I can quickly identify these. So I'm going to go to the agenda engine. It's just logging me out. All right, so I'm going to go back to agenda. So the same place we were where we were building the agenda to trigger that people flow. And I'm just going to go ahead and create new. So similar to what we've done before, we're going to repeat a lot of the same steps. In this case, this is applicable to award. So I'm going to select the namespace of award. The name, this is a validation agenda. So again, if I follow sort of the naming convention that I've set for myself, I'm going to say that this is validation, and I'm going to say award. And then the context, it's just one context associated with the namespace. So that's the context I'm going to apply. And then you see that for the award namespace, there is only one type available, and that's the unit agenda. So that's the only thing I'll be able to select here. And then again, it's applicable to all departments in my unit hierarchy. So I'm going to do my top level unit here. And I forgot to mention the active inactive indicator here. So it might be that you've built agendas in the past and they're no longer should be triggered, or the business process has changed. You simply update the agenda and inactivate it, and that will make sure that the agenda is no longer triggered. So that's what this active checkbox is doing here. And I'm going to go ahead and add a rule. So I'm going to do the same thing I did before. The exception now is that this is a validation rule. So I'm going to select the type as the validation rule. And I'm going to go ahead and indicate that this should be executed when my propositions are true. The name, so here's where I'm going to provide more context. What is this rule looking at? And in my case, what I'm going to provide here is it's the award, active awards. Again, I should have thought about the name probably prior to setting this up. So I apologize for struggling with this now. So human subjects. Must be approved on active awards. And then again, I can provide more description here. So I'm going to go ahead and now build my proposition. So I'm going to start first. So again, this is going to be built in chunks because I'm looking at multiple attributes in my award record. So I'm looking at the award status. I'm looking at special review. So I have to identify those unique pieces of data that the system is going to evaluate to give me that end result that I'm looking for. So the very first thing I'm going to look at is the award status. So I'm going to say award status equals active. And I think active status in my environment is code 1. So this is where I'm going to put that number 1 in parentheses. And then again, I know award status, that's actually a property. So I'm going to select property. And here is my award status code. Again, you can build your own properties if you find that there isn't something in the system that you're looking for. And in this case, for properties, when I select the comparison, this is the value that I'm going to enter here is going to be the code value for this. So that's why I put that number 1 in parentheses so that I can quickly reference and know that award status code 1 is active. So then I'm going to go ahead and add, because now I need to look at the special review information for human subjects. So I'm going to go ahead and add. And again, based on my experience with working with this, and it might take a little time to get familiar with what's available in the system, I know that, the thing I'm looking for now is a function that's going to look at a compliance entry of a particular type with a particular status. So here's where I'm going to put the information. So I'm going to say human subjects, which in my environment, human subject special review type code is 1. And I'm evaluating if it's in the status of pending. Approval status is pending, which is also 1. So now I'm going to select a function as the category. And then here are all the functions. And again, if you recall me saying functions is something that our developers, our engineers have to build. And again, because they have a bit more complex logic into it, and they're doing evaluations behind the scenes to give us the result we want to obtain. So I know that there is a function in here that looks at a special review type along with the approval type that's been assigned to that special review. I'm sorry. And here is that function: check award contains given special review type and approval type. So for the most part, the function name is going to tell you what the function is looking at. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And when you're working with function, the system will accept 2 values, either true or false. And those have to be lowercase. So for functions, whenever you select that as the category, the value is either going to be true or false, again, or all lowercase. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, when this function equals to true, and I get to identify what is it that the function is looking at. What is the special review type and the approval status? So approval type code here is 1, and special review type code is 1. So basically what we're saying here is if the award contains a special review type code of 1, which is human subjects, and the approval type code of pending, which is 1 here, then I want this rule to execute, which is what I'm looking for, because if it's pending and if it's human subjects pending, I don't want the user to be able to finalize the award. I want them to fix something on that award to pass this validation. But now I have to introduce another criteria, because I not only want to look at, approval status code of pending, I also want to look at approval status code of yet not apply. So I'm going to introduce some more compound logic into my validation agenda here. So basically what I'm looking for is if award status is active, and I probably should have put this in parentheses, and human subjects approval status is pending or not yet applied, then I want the system to trigger this validation. So I have to add this second attribute here for not yet applied. And the way I would do that is I'm going to go ahead and I've selected this, and I'm going to go up. I apologize. Let me just. Sometimes it's finicky. So I want to go ahead and click add parent. And what that does, it creates that compound proposition. It adds those parentheses that I've added to my slide. And I always encourage folks to check at the top here that you have the correct number of parentheses and in the right places. So basically what I've done by adding that parent, adding that compound proposition, is I've created a logic here now that the system is going to evaluate what's in these parentheses first, and then it's going to add the status code as part of it. So what I'm doing here is human subjects is approval status is pending, or human subjects approval status is not yet applied. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat that. And not yet apply status in my environment is 3. So I'm going to go ahead and select the same function that I've selected before. So check award contains approval type and a special review type, and I'm going to say equals true. And approval type code in this case is 3, and approval on human subjects is 1. So again, this is an or proposition. So this or this, and the status is active. I want the system to give me an error message in this case. So here's where I'm going to go ahead and select the type. So I'm going to select a linked validation action. I'm going to select that this is an error message. I'm going to enter what is the error message that the user should see. So I'm just going to copy what I have on my slides here. Again, that's something you'd probably want to do as part of your pre-work to identify what are the messages for validations. And then with award validations, I do have the ability to link the user to provide the fix-it link. Similarly, you can do that on the proposal side as well. So here's where I can identify. So I know that human subjects is in the compliance tab. So I'm going to go ahead and find compliance tab, and I'm just going to say Human subjects. Must be approved. And I'm going to go ahead and click the add rule. You may, again, as I've said, an agenda could have multiple rules associated with it. So if you want to group all of your award validations, all of your proposal validations into a single agenda, you can do that. So I do have the ability to add other rules that look at different areas of the award, and the system is going to evaluate everything as needed. So you do have that capability. So I'm going to go ahead and submit this, and then let me just quickly test it to make sure that my message is working as expected. My validation is working out as expected. So I am going to open up quickly just an award record. Let me see if the award record includes any compliance. It doesn't, but I'm going to add human subjects here real quick with the status of pending. Nope, I don't want to send the notification. And then let me quickly look at my status of the award is active. So I should get an error message now because I have human subjects that's pending and the award status is active. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on validations. And I have my validation right here. Human subjects compliance must be approved in order to set the award status to active. So if I go back and change the award status to something else, or if I go and update the approval status for my human subjects, then that error message might go away as needed. So for example, if I go here, and let's say now I call this as approved. And if I go back to my award actions, I have to put an approval date. Now that message is no longer there. So again, just to quickly highlight how you can build those validation rules. So I do realize we only have 2 minutes left. Are there any questions that have been posted in the chat that you guys think are important for me to answer before I try to squeeze in the questionnaire piece?
I had one question when you added the compound rule. You were clicking around in order to get it to show up the way you wanted, and I've had a real hard time getting that to happen. I just wondered what you were looking for.
Oh yeah. So let me go ahead and find the rule that I was just. What I was trying to do is because the add parent button was grayed out for me, I couldn't click on it. So that's why I was clicking around to try to refresh a little bit for that button to become active for me. Let me just find that agenda real quick. Yeah, so basically I had it selected here when I was adding, and that add parent button was grayed out for me. So basically I just clicked here and then clicked back in here for the add parent button to become active. So you're correct, the agenda builder is sometimes finicky, and it may require you to click around a little bit for it to give you what you need, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So we do, is there any other questions that I should answer? I do want to quickly go through an example for a questionnaire. And if folks could stick around till after 1, I'm okay to keep going. I know that there are other sessions that folks probably want to attend, but if you want to stick around for a little bit for me to demo the questionnaire, feel free to do so.
Kat, we also have a request from Jennifer Acorn, just asking if we could continue this in a breakout session or one of the open sessions during the day, just because there have been so many follow-up questions.
Do we know when the breakout sessions are? I'd have to follow up to see if I'm able to attend or if I'm in another session during those times.
Sounds good. I'll look it up while you're doing this.
Okay, thanks. All right, so I will move on to the questionnaire area real quick. So again, similar to what I did before, I sort of outlined the logic for myself. What am I trying to accomplish here? And sort of what rule do I need? So the sort of the business need I came up with is if the proposal is for a gift, again, I don't know how realistic that is, but let's say that I have a process where all proposals, regardless of how the funding is being received, come through Kuali. So let's say if a proposal is for a gift, I want to ask specific questions that are just related for that type of a proposal. So let's say there is a gift questionnaire or something that I want to ask. So again, this is going to, I'm going to outline and I'm going to highlight what pieces of data in proposal can I use to build this logic out. So I know this is applicable to proposal development. So how I'm identifying what type of a proposal it is, I know that in proposal development, there is a field called anticipated award type. And that's where I'm asking folks to identify it. Is this a grant? Is this a contract? Is this a gift? Is this an unfunded agreement? Whatever the case may be. So I know I'm going to use that anticipated award type field to identify that this is a gift. And then if it is a gift, then this questionnaire that I'm going to build should become available to the users, and it should be required to be completed. So again, similar to what we've seen with people flow, there is some pre-work that I should do before actually going and building this rule. And one of the pre-work is building the actual questions. So again, you have to build your questions, and then we can go and build questionnaires and tell the system when to trigger those questionnaires. So I've already done the pre-work, so I'm not going to show you how to build a question. I've already have the questionnaire question built into the system. But I did need to gather what is the anticipated award type, what's the code value associated with gift in my environment. So I've gathered that information, and I know that it's code value 11, so I'm going to use that information. And again, this is going to be applicable to all of the departments. So I'm going to go ahead and go through my process again. I'm going to go to agendas. I'm going to go to all links. And I'm going to go ahead and click on the create new. I'm going to follow the steps that I did before. I'm going to select the namespace. I'm going to say that this is, again, proposal development. I'm going to follow my same logic. I'm going to identify that this is a questionnaire agenda. And I'm going to say gift questionnaire.
And Kat, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I know people are having to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to see if it worked for you. The next virtual cafe is 2 to 2:30 Eastern. So if you were available, then we could, anybody who was interested, we could kind of follow, continue this conversation using that link.
Yes, I am available at that time, so I can make sure to attend that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yep. So for those folks that are on the line, I'll just continue with this, and then with the rest of the folks that are going to join during that time, we'll pick up wherever folks want us to pick up. Does that sound okay with everyone? All right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and select the context here real quick. Again, there's only one context per module, so the system is only going to allow you to select what's available. And then this is going to be the questionnaire agenda. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. Again, identify the units. So it is going to be applicable to all of the units in my hierarchy. So I'm just going to put the top level. And then same thing, I'm going to build a rule here. So I'm going to say that this is for my award type is gift. I'm going to go ahead and build my proposition. So again, looking back on my criteria, I am using the award type, that anticipated award type, as the triggering point to enable these questions, that questionnaire that I want to set up. So I'm going to go ahead and say award. I'm going to say anticipated equals gift, and then in parentheses I'm going to put 11. And then category, I know that the award type, that anticipated award type, is a property. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, and I see anticipated award type as a term available here. Comparison is going to be 11. It's going to be equals, and then it's going to be 11. So again, for properties, you want to enter the code value associated with what you're using, or it might be the text value exactly as it shows up. For functions, it's always going to be either true or false, again, lowercase. And then there's no action that I need the system to take because this is not a routing rule. This is not a validation rule. This is just a rule that is going to be used in a questionnaire. So in this case, the action is going to be left blank. And I'm going to go ahead and click on this add rule. And I'm going to go and finalize my agenda. And now I can go and build my questionnaire. So again, I'm not going to go through each of the steps. I'm going to quickly build a questionnaire. And I'm going to show you where that rule would be associated in my questionnaire. So this is a gift questionnaire. I'm going to make this questionnaire active. I only have one question that I've set up. So in the content, I'm going to go ahead and add that question that I've set up. And I actually did give it a category so I can quickly find it. Oh, actually, there are two questions. So I'm going to go ahead and return this first one here. So here's my question. So I'll just do this one for now. One thing I do want to add is that a rule could be tied to a questionnaire to trigger an entire questionnaire, or you could also associate an agenda rule with a specific question alone. So if there is ever a need to only show up a question in a particular case only, you do have that capability to associate a question with a rule. In my case, I want to trigger this whole questionnaire on my proposal. So in the usage area is where I'm going to identify the rule that's going to trigger this questionnaire. So this is going to be a proposal development questionnaire. I'm going to go ahead and click on the rule ID here now to find that rule. And again, I should have noted. And I think it was award type is gift. Here it is. And this questionnaire is going to be mandatory. So if you look at my business need, we did want to make it mandatory. And I'm just going to call it gift questionnaire. And this is the label that users will see when this questionnaire is triggered. And I'm going to go ahead and submit this. So now, again, I quickly want to validate that what I've built is working and is behaving as it needs to. So I'm going to go into my proposal record. And the attribute that I'm using to trigger that questionnaire is this anticipated award type, and it's gift right now. So I'm going to change it to contract. And if I go to the questionnaire area, I don't see that gift questionnaire in here now. But if I go back here and I change the anticipated award type to gift, and I go back to my questionnaire, if everything that I've set up is correct, I now see my gift questionnaire with the questions that I've identified. So again, I just want to give you sort of the three flavors of what the KRMS agenda are able to do. And again, I didn't have time to cover the terms part. So maybe if we have time in the cafe this afternoon, we can take a look at that if folks have questions. But I apologize for going long, but I hope that you found this session at least a little bit helpful, and hopefully it'll introduce you to sort of the capabilities of what the KRMS engine is able to do. So for those of the folks that are on the line, are there any questions?
So Kat, are you definitely going to cover adding terms in the virtual this afternoon or no?
Well, it's hard to tell because I'm not quite sure what the folks had in mind. I can make sure to cover that. So I know we only have 30 minutes. But I also, has anyone attended? I apologize. I have not attended a virtual cafe in any of the prior days. So I'm not quite sure of what the format is, if I'm going to be able to hijack that and just say, hey, this is what I'm doing.
Just hijack it. It's fine.
Yeah.
I know Drew has been playing games with people, so I was thinking we could either take it over, or if people do show up to play games, we could always share, either, Kat's personal link to Zoom or mine, and we could, jump into another session.
That sounds like a great idea. So yeah, Chris, I can make sure to cover that. Yep.
Great. Thanks.
Awesome. In terms is really just looking at a field in a database and comparing that sort of to what we built in the validation rule. So it's not actually doing any sort of complex logic like functions do. So it's really just focusing on a field and whether a value is entered in that field or if the field is blank or not. So that's what we're looking at. It's really just those simple properties that we can add into Kuali. So I've linked my slides to 2 articles, and you will probably need to use these resources because I use these resources every time I need to set up a new property for a customer. So the very first thing is we have this document, this resource here. Let me close this one out, where we, one of the first thing that you need to identify, first of all, first thing you probably want to do is you're trying to build a validation for something or trying to create a routing rule or a questionnaire rule, and you realize you don't have a function and you don't have a property. So the next step would be, can I add that as a property into the system? So we have this document that outlines the different terms, variables, I guess, that are available for us to build properties for. So this document will list the term variables, and it's split up by modules. So we have proposal development variables, we have IP variables. So if you keep scrolling down, you're going to see everything that sort of we've documented to date for the different variables. So let's say I want to build a validation on an NSF science code and proposal development. And I know because I checked, I don't have a function for NSF science code, which is this field right here. And there is not a property for NSF science code. So with what I have available out of the box, I just don't have the tools to currently set up a validation or a routing rule based on this field. So what I would do in this case is I would come here and say, look at proposal development variables and see, is that variable available for me to add into the system as a term for then for that to be available as a property in the KRMS agenda editor. So if I keep scrolling down, I see, okay, I have the information I need here. NSF science code is here. I see the name, I see the data type that it is. So now I can go and create a term. Creating a term is a 2-step process. And again, we have instructions on how to set up a term, which is this document right here. So again, I reference to this all the time because I even tend to forget, do I add a term first and then a term specification? Or do I have to add a term specification first and then a term? So I get confused as well. So I do reference these articles quite often, especially if I have to build properties of terms. So the first thing we need to do is we need to build a term specification. And for the term specification we need these variables names in order to build that term specification. Once we build a term specification, we then have to create the term for that term specification. Once we complete these 2 steps first, then we'll be able to go into the agenda, and the term that we've just built is going to show up under properties. So I'm going to do these steps real quick, and then we'll build a quick validation using that property that I'm just going to build. So I'm going to go into Kuali. I'm going to go back to all links. And again, the first step is to build a term specification. So I'm going to find that maintenance table. It's term specification. Again, you might want to just validate that what you're building, the term specification, that it already doesn't exist in the system. So what I tend to do as a first step is I would just copy this because this is the name. Now just paste that into the name and search just to validate that it hasn't been already created. So I see it's not in the system. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that create new button. And now I'm going to complete this information. Again, that article that I have linked to goes through the steps of what each of these fields are and has some definitions. So I'll quickly review that as well. So again, we've seen namespace in other places. So here's where we're identifying what module this is applicable to. I wanted one for proposal development. So I am going to select a proposal development namespace. If you want to build a validation for NSF science code in each one of your modules, you'll have to create this term for each applicable module, so that it shows up in each of these sort of agenda namespaces. So just a note on that. The name is the name of the variable. So again, this is why this article is handy, because it lists the variable name. So you want to copy and paste this name exactly. It does have to be as it shows up in this article. And then the data type, again, this is where you're going to come into the variables article and copy the data type, which is this right here. And then the description is the description, the layman description for your own purposes. So in this case, I often like to call this whatever the field name is in the UI. So in this case, this is NSF Science Code field. So that's what I would call it. And then we have to add a context and we have to add a category. So we can only add one context. And again, the context needs to correspond to the namespace. So I'm going to click on the magnifying glass here. I just do a blanket search and then find the proposal development context. Again, if you want to get, there's only 6 that are available. So you can do that blanket search and select the one you want. So again, you want to make sure you select the context that corresponds to the namespace. And there could only be one context per term. So just a note on that. And then we want to select category. So this is where we're going to.
If there can only be one context per term, why is that a list?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sorry. I'd have to follow up. Yeah. I know that specifically in our instructions, we do make it a point to let folks know that only one can be listed. And then on the categories, we're going to select the property category for proposal development. So again, I just do a blanket search. There are 22 options here. But again, PD property category is the one that comes up first. You see there are other options here. Even though these are options, even you see that you have a namespace PD for a function and for a questionnaire, even if you try to set it up in the UI, it's not going to work. The only thing that works is a property category here for us. Again, functions need a lot more coding behind the scenes and similar with questionnaires. So I'm going to do property as the category, and we want to click the add button. And then once we select the options here, we're going to submit this to finalize this document. And now the next step is to create the term for this term specification. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to all links. I'm going to look for term. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new document. And the only thing I need to do here is find the specification that I've just added. So I'm going to click on the magnifying glass, and no, I have NSF in the name. And then the description, again, I'm going to put the description of the field, what the field name is in the UI. And then I'm just going to go ahead and submit to finalize this. So now, once you complete these 2 steps, if we're going to go back to the agenda, and I'm just going to create a new agenda. I'm going to create new, and I'm going to say that these are my proposal validations. And just complete these fields. I'm going to go ahead and add rule right now, and I'm going to say NSF Science Code is required. And this is going to be a validation rule, execute when true. So now if I go to add proposition, and if I select a category of property, the NSF Science Code is now available as a property here, and I can use it to build my validation. So, and in this case, the validation is looking that it's completed. So in my comparison, I'm going to say that if NSF Science Code is null, meaning nothing is selected, then I'm going to have a validation action, and I'm going to give it a warning because I don't want to impact other folks that may be working in the system right now. Please select NSF Science Code. And then I can, again, configure the fix-it link. The fix-it link works slightly different on proposal development than it does in award. And then we have an article on how to find the fix-it link. Section names in this article. So I want this to go into the sponsor and program info page. So I'm just copying that information here. So that's going to determine where the fix-it link is going to take the user, what area of the proposal. Is that applicable? NSF Science Code, and I'm going to click the add rule, and I'll. With properties, you may get this error come up here. It's okay. It is valid. Once I submit and finalize it, this is going to go away. But sometimes you may see that error come up. So now it's final. So now if I go into my proposal, and let me just validate, make sure. NSF Science Code, I don't have anything selected. I'll go here. There might be other validation messages here, but let me quickly see. Here's my warning message that I've just selected. Please select NSF Science Code. And this is the fix-it link that I've configured by identifying the section and areas. And then I'll be able to come here. And once I select the NSF Science Code, that warning is now gone. So these properties, again, you can set them up in PD awards, subawards, and IP as well. Okay. All right. Any other questions? I've looked through the chat and gone through some of the questions that were posted in the chat. There was some feedback on, once you get something wrong in the agenda, is there a way to quickly spot what is wrong? And honestly, I haven't found a way to be able to quickly figure out what's wrong. So oftentimes it is sort of, let me delete my propositions and let me try again and see what happens. That's why I encourage you to, as you're building them, go and check instead of building a bunch and then having to trace back, see which one is broke. So. Any questions?
So have you taken additional contributions to make other variables available to the term spec? That static list on Victor's knowledge base page.
Yeah, so we just haven't gotten to updating this. One thing I've recently learned is I was trying to build a validation for a field, for a newer field, and we just haven't gotten to updating that document. And I was like, oh, let me see if I can build a property. So the first thing is identifying what is the variable name. And I've learned that if I click on the field name and I do inspect, this is in Chrome, I can figure out the variable name right here. And then for the most part, most of our fields are going to be strings, or if it's a date field, obviously it'll be a date field. So then just, copying this and updating the later part to be a string if it's a date or a number field. But that's sort of the workaround I've figured out, a few months ago, because again, I was trying to build a validation. I didn't see it as a variable in our documentation. So doing a quick, let me inspect this in Chrome and figure out the variable name, and then just took a guess that it was a string, and it worked. So
if oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I would say give that a try if you see that there's something missing from the list that we have on our document.
So if it's actually part of the code already, we can go and look at the code and figure out the actual variable name and add it.
How deep on the object graph can you go? So if you're in proposals, can you get down into, say, PI's extended attribute information?
So right, as long as it's in as long as the data is in the proposal itself. So when you add a person, the person information copies into the proposal. So yes, if it's here. But the one thing with properties, though, keep in mind that every person will have the same fields. So I don't think a property will work for something that repeats itself.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how does it, is there a way that we can handle collections of things? Because that's definitely a, obviously it might be complicated enough. You'd need to create a function for it, but it would be nice if, because, all of the APIs, you can return these basically JSON representations of the object graph, right? And so you could pull things out of that if, I mean, it might be a bit of an enhancement to the term spec functionality, but
Yeah, from my understanding, that would require to be an enhancement. Right now, if the field repeats itself, you won't be able to use the property for that.
so no collections.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I don't think so. Tyler?
Nope.
Well, thank you guys for joining on the break, on your
Yeah.
break and your free time.
Thanks for coming back.
No
I guess
worries.
I have
Oh.
kind of have one other question on the agendas where you have conditional rules. How are the actions determined on those rules? I mean, if
Can you explain a little bit? Because I'm not sure I understand.
in your presentation, you had a picture of what looked to be rules and they're nested.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
When false, do
Yep.
this.
Yeah, let me
Is it
quickly-
every rule still has its own action? And then
Yes. Right, so let me quickly show you if you have time.
Sure.
Yeah, a rule can have an action or it doesn't have to. It might be just that you first need to evaluate this, and if that is true, then it sends to evaluate something else, and that has an action. So it may or it doesn't have to have an action. So let me build one real quick.
Okay, so your rules may just be to produce a result of true or false,
Exactly.
and it's not actually doing anything,
Yes.
which then can trigger other rules within your agenda.
Yeah, and those rules could do something, or it can continue to evaluate farther. Yeah.
I guess I didn't realize you don't have to have an action with your rule.
Yep. Nope. Yep. Yeah, so I don't know. It might take me a while to
That-
build one.
I don't need to build one.
Okay.
that it makes sense.
Yep.
What
And-
being there or what you're describing. I missed the link that they don't have to have an action.
Yeah, and we often see that sort of, I'm going to call it compound logic. I don't know if that's the right word to use for that, but we often see that with routing. Sometimes institutions will have where, does the proposal include these 3 criteria? Yes or no? If yes, then route it here. If no, route it somewhere else.
Right.
So.
And then I think it's a part of the base code is being able to have a department college hierarchy kind of approval
Yes.
that is in there.
Right. So so it's tied to unit administrator table.
Right.
And yes, we have unit admin roles that correspond to that table. So yeah, it can route to the chair and then to the dean.
Can you specify other types?
Yes, we can build additional unit admin roles for unit admin types and then pull that into the
So
routing.
you can route it to whatever type you want to put in there. And
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, I only scratched the surface in our training today. You guys know how complex this can get. So
Yeah.
I want to give folks a bit of an intro to this.
All right.
Other questions?
Not for me. Tyler looks like he's coming up with another one though.
I have a quick, I was gonna say, I have a quick question, and it might have been answered at the end of the last session. I had to jump out quick. So when you're in the rules and you're setting up a new rule, and you're saying it's based on a custom attribute, and there's that area where you can set the name for that custom attribute. It's just some random ID, it appears. Is naming that beneficial in any way? I mean, does it save that for future?
Yeah, so it is, yeah, let me open up one real quick. So you're correct. It's not just with custom data. It actually happens with any rule you build, any propositions you add. So let me see, here's an example. Let's see what this one is all
Because
about.
it's creating a new term.
Yeah, it's creating a new term. And, you know, even though it looks like the system, oh, this is not a good example. Even though it looks like the system is going to allow you to, while you're building that proposition or adding that proposition, to overwrite that info, it doesn't. It still just saves it as those numbers and letters. But you could go back into the term document and update the name there, so that if you go back and look at that agenda rule and the propositions, then the name you updated in the term document will show up. So all of the rules that I created today, if I go to the term document, they're all here. And again, I don't know, they're not in any particular order. They're all going to show up here as a new term with a bunch of numbers and letters. So if you do want to just jot down a part of this and then go into this term document, you can edit this term here.
You're not displaying anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was. Okay, so let me take a step back. Okay. So all of the rules, all of the terms I was adding today, the terms are saved in the term document. So here I just did a blanket search, and they may have been created today or not, but here is one. This is an example of a term that was created. And again, it's the name that the system generated for that term. So if you do want to get in the habit of updating the name of these, you can come into the term document here, find the term that you just added in your agenda, click the edit button, and you'll be able to override the description here. So this is looking at a cost element. Someone built something with a cost element. So I would come here and update the description appropriately, so that if I go back into my agenda and then I look at this, I'll see the term name that you've updated here. And then also in the list of the terms, if you go and create a new term, you're not going to see this in the drop down. You'll see whatever name you've assigned it to this term. So if you build a term and you need to reuse it multiple times, it might make sense to update the name so that you can quickly find it.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Does that term name have to be unique? I think that's why they make that gibberish name.
I would assume so. I'm not sure 100%. I'll follow up. I would think so. Well, but there's term IDs are assigned, so that might serve as the unique. I'll follow up. I don't want to speculate. Yeah. Okay. If you guys think of any other questions, feel free to, email me or.
Is there, I guess one of the questions I have is, it seems that the term list, I guess, shows all the terms, functions, and properties. If you select function, it still looks like it shows functions that you've previously defined as terms, and then the ones that are new, if you will, and you can't edit or update a previously defined term. Is that?
You could update a previously defined term.
You'd have to go through the term lookup.
Exactly. You have to find it and update it there. Yeah.
But is there, I guess, a way to filter down that drop down list so that we can
Yeah,
show just the functions undefined.
yeah,
Is
I'm
that
not
making
aware.
sense?
Yeah, I know where you, so that, because the more validation, the more rules you add, the more terms. That list is going to continue to grow because potentially you
Yeah.
can use multiple functions in different rules, and every time you use something, it creates a new term. So yes, we have some customers where that list is very, very long, and I don't know of a way. I don't think there's a way to narrow it down to make that list only show you the functions that, you know,
Yeah,
the functions that come out of the box or something like that.
it seems like the functions that come out of the box are all at the bottom at least.
Hmm. Maybe like a sort, maybe a sorting, some sort of a mechanism. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's not possible right now, but you know, with this being sort of like the system admin back office, not so much emphasis gets added on the usability.
It doesn't get the love that the
It
others.
doesn't get, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Because they feel like the system admins can deal with, they know what they're doing, they can figure it out.
Yeah, well, I'd like to pawn it off onto others, but it's so esoteric. It's hard to.
Yeah.
Justify giving others keys to the kingdom, I guess.
Yeah.
Because they constantly come back. I can't remember how to do this.
And yeah, I will say
Half
that
the
this
time
is,
I can't either. But
yeah, and even with myself, you know, I spend a lot of time in it, but if I don't build anything in like a month, it's like, oh my God, how do I do this again? So it is one of those things, is like the more you're in it, the more you remember. But then if you have like, you know, a month, couple of months away from doing anything, you'll have to refresh your memory again. So
yep. Well, thanks.
well, thank you guys. And yeah, feel free to
Thank
reach
you.
out to me if you guys think of any other questions, and I'll try to respond.